Hi, I'm Amy Porter, and this is my podcast. My mission is to show people how to empower themselves through music, business, and media. I try to see as clearly as possible how I can help. I showcase the music that I've played and the people I've met along the way. I'm a wife and a stepmom. You might know me as a professor, a performer, a producer, a publisher, a recording artist. I'm the founder of a couple of nonprofits. Welcome in to my Porter Flute pod. Welcome to Porter Flute Pod. I'm thrilled to be coming to you with another season of thoughts and ideas and guests and random wisdom from my life. And I love bringing people on with me that were influential in my life as a performing artist. We call this episode Friendcast, and my guest is flute pedagogue and former Principal Flute of the Met, Trudy Kane. With me in the pod co-producing is Alan J. Tomasetti, and we welcome our new co-producer, Jordan Smith. Together, they're making sure all the questions and all the bases are covered. I went to my sound vault and I pulled out one of my performances of the Fantasy on a Theme from Carmen by Bohemes. Thanks for joining me in my 6th season of Porter Flute Pod. I'm so happy you're here. Trudy Kane was Principal Flute with the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra from 1976 through 2008 and is Emeritus Associate Professor at the Faure School of Music, where she retired in 2019. She received her Bachelor of Music and Masters of Music from the Juilliard School. She is active in the commercial recording field and can be heard on the soundtracks of many film scores, including The Untouchables and Beauty and the Beast original. Kane can be heard and seen on many Met videos, including Il Trittico, Manon Lescaut, Peter Grimes, and 3 different productions of La Boheme. Her solo CD in the French style includes Sonatas by Franck and Faure and the Gieseking Sonatine. In 2015, the Faure School of Music commissioned Ellen Zwillich's Concerto Elegia, which was premiered and recorded by Trudy Kane as a soloist, with Thomas Sleeper conducting the Faure Symphony Orchestra. She performed the Zwillich Concerto Elegia at the 2016 NFA convention. At the 2018 NFA convention, she and the Frost Flute Ensemble performed Thomas Sleeper's Concerto for Flute and Flute Orchestra. And in 2017, Thomas Sleeper wrote a sonata for her, and she performed it at Frost and at the 2018 Florida Flute Convention. Kane has been active in commissioning new works, especially from the Frost faculty, and her publications include arrangements of Act 3 from Puccini's La Boheme, and Intermezzo to Act 3 of Puccini's Manon Lescaut, Smetana's Overture to the Barter Bride, many more for flute ensemble. She's written for flute quartet, and she's published her cadenzas to the Mozart Flute Concerto in D, and she's transcribed the Faure Violin Sonata. Trudy Kane gives masterclasses around the world. She's traveled internationally. She's a consulting editor at Flute Talk magazine, and she has an article for Flute Talk, including That's So Difficult, and one called Keeping Music Fresh. Her article Vibrato is published in the 2nd NFA Pedagogy book. She is the 2024 Lifetime Achievement Award winner. So this coming August, we're going to celebrate the life of Trudy Kane and the career of Trudy Kane and all the accomplishments of Trudy Kane in San Antonio, Texas. So congratulations to Trudy Kane on your lifetime of work. I'm going to read an article written in Opera Wire in 2020 by Greg Waxberg. He writes about a wonderful dissertation by Emily Dierks, and the wonderful dissertation topic is Trudy Kane. So, here's the article. The life story of a notable instrumentalist in the opera world has been documented by a rising musician who learned from her. Trudy Kane served as principal flutist of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra from 1976 to 2008. Then taught at the University of Miami's Faure School of Music, where she retired in 2019. One of her students was Emily Dierks, who recently received a DMA, Doctor of Musical Arts, in Instrumental Performance. To honor her mentor, Dierks chose to write her doctoral essay in the form of an oral history of Kane's career. She's had an amazing career as a performer and a great reputation as a pedagogue. Emily writes, I started researching her and not much was coming up. There have been some notable interviews, but not much in depth. I wanted to document her stories. Dierks told Opera Wire. A benefit of Dierks' work is that it puts a rare spotlight on a musician from an opera orchestra. She says, we usually think about top orchestras like Boston and Berlin. Trudy Kane is one of the best flutists I've ever heard and learned from, and the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra is one of the best. They deserve to be written about. More than anything, Dierks emphasizes Kane's nurturing side. She goes on, I started my college career as a naive music lover who wanted to be a performer and a professor, to have the best of both worlds, but had no clue what it meant to make it in the flute world. I had this amazing growth spurt during my time with Trudy. Emily attributes this growth to Kane's faith in her students and her abilities to unlock potential, remove mental barriers, and develop individual artistry. She never gives the impression that life in the music field is easy, but she always encourages us by letting us know that it is possible. She regularly shares that the keys to being successful in the music world are preparation, perseverance, and kindness. Dierks also says that Kane showed me everything that a professor could be. I love performing, but teaching has always been a passion. Being her student made me want to teach even more because she's so patient, but she pushes us out of our comfort zone in the kindest way. When asked about aspects of Kane's career as a female instrumentalist that have surprised and inspired her, Dierks pauses. She says, I was surprised by her stories of being a woman principal and having certain colleagues question why she was there. I thought that was something that had happened earlier in history than the 1970s and it had gone away, but it is still happening. For inspiration, never giving up, and sharing accomplishments with her students, such as students premiering her new arrangements for flute choir and performing at conferences she attended. Emily says, my biggest takeaway from knowing Trudy and studying her career is that she has an amazing ability to win people over. She has the most endearing personality. Dierks is planning a second oral history project on Trudy Kane. You can read the entire dissertation, which is open access at scholarship.miami.edu. Trudy Kane, welcome to Porter Flute Pod.
Thank you. It's so nice to be with you.
We go back a long way.
It is a long way, and it's a wonderful way. I loved when you came to my home and took lessons. It was terrific.
Well, it was post-master's degree.
That's right. That's right.
We can never stop coaching sometimes.
But that's probably the best answer, is that even if we're not going to someone else, we can coach ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I have to start from the beginning. I heard you play in Weill Hall at Carnegie Hall. You came out of the pit, so to speak, to play on the stage. First of all, I want to ask you how that felt and what that Weill Hall recital was like for you. You must remember it.
Oh, I remember it very distinctly. I enjoyed it so much. I enjoyed preparing for it. I enjoyed planning for it. The one thing I didn't enjoy about the recital was, actually, there were two things, excuse me. there was a hole in the wall in the back somewhere, not visible to the audience, but it was wintertime and cold air was coming in. So you could feel that. That's number one. Number two, I think I may still have been playing on a flute that was 440 and the piano was 442. And I had to push it in. And of course, that changes the relationships of all the notes. So that was interesting, but it was a wonderful distraction from any kind of nerves.
Well, I have to say, I didn't notice. I didn't remember that. I remembered two words that I took into my life. You created a sense of consistency, which meant not only in tone, but in your timing, in the flow of the piece, the flow of the movements. And I remembered thinking, well, I don't do that. I kind of react to my phrasing. I kind of, I'm doing what I'm doing. And does it relate to anything? I don't think so. And how old am I? I'm 25. No, 24. So you have this 3, 24-year-old watching you, listening to you. The other thing you gave me was a sense of endurance, that you could make it from the first note to the last note, not show fatigue, and show the consistency. So consistency and endurance, I learned from Trudy Kane just by listening to you. We didn't even know each other. So you could have fooled me with the pitch issue.
Well, thank you for saying that. I just want to talk to you a little bit about the consistency and the endurance. Obviously, I played the opera. When you play an opera that's 4 hours long, of course, there are intermissions, but still, you learn to pace yourself. You have to be on top of it all the time. And sometimes I would play 2 operas in a day, which means pacing yourself even more so. So I was used to that, although I will say that a recital is different than an opera because you're on 100% of the time, not just part of the time as you are in the orchestra. So that in itself took some practicing just to get the strength and whatever. The other issue that you brought up about the phrasing, though, that's a very important issue. And I think it's something we all learn as we get older and more experienced. We start out, of course, we're making wonderful little phrases, but where are those little phrases going? And when we learn to take one phrase to the next phrase, to the next phrase, to the next phrase, just as we are taking one note to the next note, to the next note, and make the movement have a shape and then the entire piece have a shape, that's when we really are starting to be something very special. So thank you for saying what you did.
Well, it's not something that you can consider when you're younger because you're learning all these things and your body's teaching you things, your mind's teaching you things. So to consider something so massive as form and flow and relationship is something a little more advanced, I believe.
And you're right. You were at absolutely the right point to hear it, to absorb it, to understand it. And I remember when I graduated from Juilliard and started taking auditions and thinking I had to prepare these things. I didn't have a teacher to help me. Of course, I had plenty of teachers, but I thought, why does, for instance, Julius Baker sound different than I do? What is he doing that's making it work in a way that I would like it to, but I'm not doing? And listening, that's one of the things I heard. And you talk about consistency. He certainly had it. He was always, always, always there.
Thank you for teaching me. It was about 1989, and you helped me win the NFA competition in 1990. My friend Lowell had written a sonata, and this podcast has had Lowell on it. It has heard the story of me bringing the Lieberman sonata to the NFA competition a couple of times. So the podcast listeners are familiar with that story from me. But how about the teacher who'd never heard the sonata before, right? It had been written for Paula the year before, and it said in the NFA qualifications criteria, it said, bring an American work. So my friend Lowell wrote a sonata. I brought an American work to you. I brought you Prokofiev sonata, and I brought you Martin Ballade. I brought you lots of Bach, I think. Pretty sure there was some Bach in there. So, Trudy, can you speak to remembering how it was to teach me? Wouldn't you love someone to tell you about you when you were a student? Because we don't remember.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. I remember someone who was so obviously right on the brink. There was no question. You had everything right there. And you had, on top of having the skills and the talent, I hope I'm not gushing. You had the most important thing, and that was the desire. And of course, you had the discipline, but you had that desire. You were so motivated to do the best possible job that you could when you played and to show everyone what you could do. And my job was simply to help you do that to the best of your ability. And it was not a difficult job for me. So I enjoyed it. I enjoyed learning the piece. The piece was fantastic. I was so happy to be introduced to it. And I was quite convinced that playing it was going to help you in every possible way to win the competition. And I wasn't the slightest bit surprised that you did win.
Well, when you speak about honesty and doing the best job you can, I tell my students that it's not ego talking when I say, I don't want to just do a good job. I want to play the musical truth. And if I could go home at the end of the concert and say, I did exactly what was on the page, then I'm fine with that. And I think that's my deepest desire, is to get to that point where I can just do what's supposed to be done. I also tell my students, I'm giving you the Mona Lisa. Here it is. You can't possibly replicate it. So go ahead and just study it and do your own Mona Lisa. Well, the problem is, don't give her pink hair and 3 eyes. You have to stick by the rules.
You know, what you're saying reminds me of very early in my Met career. I played Fidelio for the first time at the Met with Carl Böhm. Carl Böhm was 80 years old at the time. He needed to be escorted to the pit. He was kind of frail, and he sat down and conducted. And suddenly this giant appeared who had all this strength but most of all the musicality. Every single mark in the music was observed. In my lifetime, I never played with another conductor who did Fidelio that way. Every single mark. But again, there was that sense of the overall sweep of the entire opera. The shape of the opera was so special. And I know you want to ask me about playing the opera. That is one of the most wonderful things that one could learn, is where's everything going? Where we have a plot, we have, the soprano's going to die, the tenor's somebody's going to die, most likely. And we're all going towards that. And why does this happen? And who's in love with who and who shouldn't be in love with who and all. But the point is to have a sense of line, that takes you from the beginning through all these wonderful things that are happening all the way to the climax. And when we get to the climax, it's not necessarily the end. So we then have to go from there and make some sense out of what's happened from that climax also.
Before we get to your career, we got to keep talking about the teaching, is the vibrato exercise. You said it to me this way. You said, I stand in front of the human voice every day. Actually, it comes from behind me, you said, and I listened to their vibrato, and it came to me one day that our vibrato is like the human vibrato singing. So you taught me this incredible exercise, which has been taught for at least 25 years of my time at Michigan and all your life, and it is so vocal. Can you talk about the vibrato, maybe not necessarily the exercise, but the 2 vocal folds, the one on either side, that makes such a difference?
Well, the most important thing is when you hear a great singer, you can always tell that their throat is open. And we have Remember that the throat has to be so open from the top to all the way to the bottom, I guess. All right, that's the start. The vibrato then. The vibrato is everything. The vibrato will help you shape everything. You can use a wider vibrato. You can use a narrower vibrato to make different colors, to help you go from one line to another, to go from one note to another, to help you change dynamics. And really, truly a natural thing. It's something that we need to work at. And it will be the first thing that we lose when we don't practice it, and the last thing to come back. So we want to always be on top of practicing that, so we have the control. And I think that I taught it to you also because it helps so much with how you approach the flute, how you blow into the flute. And when you do this correctly, which I know you're doing, then you are set for how you're going to blow into the flute. That's why I like to do it first every day. I still do. And it just sets up everything so that you're blowing, you're supporting well, you're relaxing down, all of those wonderful things. So
I want you to envision a 29-year-old Kobe competition entrant, 4:00 in the morning in Japan, in the hotel. I snuck into a ballroom and they don't have lights on at 4 a.m. My time, I had to be on the train by 8, something like that. So I got up at 4 and I did the vibrato exercise. I sat on the floor doing the vibrato exercise at 4:30 in the morning to warm up for one of my rounds in Kobe. Because I every note.
That's perfect. Perfect.
Could you talk about what it was like to perform with the Met Orchestra?
The Met Orchestra is one of the great orchestras of the world. I will tell you that it was not when I first came. There were a lot of weaknesses in the orchestra, and that changed over the years. But the one thing that was noticeable immediately when I got to the orchestra was the way they listened and the way they followed the singers. They were always there. If something happened on the stage, if a singer didn't come in or jumped to rest or something, it was amazing. The entire orchestra would jump, even if the conductor didn't. The orchestra would do that. It was a wonderful, wonderful lesson. And that is musicality. Listening, making music with other people was so wonderful. Of course, over the years, and I know every orchestra this happened with, the orchestra got a lot better. Younger people came in, standards were different. The level went up. It was great. It was so wonderful to play with so many wonderful people and to play with so many wonderful conductors. When people asked me what it was like to play with Kleiber, my answer was, this is what we all went into music for. He was at another level. It was just amazing. I only did 2 operas with him because he only came to us a very little bit. I did La Boheme, which was unbelievable, and Otello, fantastic. Nello Santi, I loved Nello Santi. Nello Santi was this big man, and he conducted from memory. And my early years, he had still a wonderful voice, and in our orchestra rehearsals, he literally sang all the parts while we were playing in his own register. But the voice was so good that it was better than all the singers. One year he came and he said, it's gone. and he stopped singing, but he was wonderful. And not only did he conduct without a score and remember everything, but if you made a mistake, he would remember for the next time and the next time and the next time, not in a bad way. But when we got to that passage, he'd be right there to make sure that if you needed help, he was there to help. Giuseppe Patinè was another one with the memory. And I remember doing Lohengrin with him. And that was the first time I really thought about what it was like to have this feeling of the sweep of the piece, a 5-hour opera. And it flowed all the way through. There's a great story with him too. Again, no score. And we were playing Madame Butterfly, and he stopped and he said, no, the second oboe is wrong. Did it again. No, the second oboe is wrong. Did it again. He said, okay. His English was very poor. He reached in his back pocket and he pulled out a little tiny pencil and a little piece of paper, and he just said, wait. And he wrote down, I saw the music because obviously I was right by the oboes. He wrote down several bars, including a bar, a rehearsal number, and bars rest, and the correct bar. It's really amazing. We loved Patinè. I think that we probably loved him more than anyone until Kleiber. Seiji Ozawa did only one opera while I was there, Eugene Onegin. It was magic. Magic from the first moment. Absolutely wonderful. Lauren Mazel did, again, only one opera while I was there, but it bears mentioning that before I was at the Met, I was first call sub with the New York Philharmonic for 2 years. And I had played first flute at 25 in Park's concerts with Mazel conducting. So here was 30 years later, I was playing with Mazel, who was not the most personable person, but what an extraordinary musician. So after the first rehearsal, a lot of people lined up to speak to him, and he was just not good at speaking with people. So my turn came, and I told him that 30 years before I had played first flute with him conducting in the New York Philharmonic in the Park, and he said something extraordinary to me. He said, I knew I recognized your face, and I didn't know from where.
That's nice.
Isn't that lovely? And the last Fabio Luisi, he came at the end of my time at the Met, and then he became the principal conductor for several years at the Met. He was wonderful, and one of those people who could do everything. You know, some are best in the German repertoire and some in the Italian and so on. He could do everything. And he was also a sweetheart, wonderful musician. He's the one who, he's the music director in Dallas, and he brought the Met Orchestra when they weren't being paid to do a concert with the Dallas Symphony. That shows you what kind of a person he was. And he was a musician just like that.
Well, obviously your musicality has been shaped by conductors, but what about the great singers?
Well, there were so many, but there's one who always stood out in my mind, and that was Leontine Price. And what a delight she was. I just always well-dressed, always carried herself beautifully. And when she sang, that's a lesson too. And you are probably too young to remember this, but I remember reading about when she was a student and her teacher at Juilliard, I believe, took her clothing shopping. So she helped her. She helped shape this persona, which I'm sure was in there. She just helped bring it out. But she always carried herself beautifully. And when she sang, it was just magnificent beyond magnificent. I mean, I just loved every single note. And two stories. She obviously loved to shop, and this will come out. One she told at a gala concert for Channel 13. She said she was shopping for makeup, and a woman said to her, "Are you Joan Sutherland?" And she said, "No, I'm Beverly Sills."
What a great answer.
Isn't that wonderful? I did see her in Saks Fifth Avenue more than once, and she always said, "Hello, my dears." It was just very, very, very sweet, lovely lady, and there was so much to be learned from how she did everything. I mean, there were so many great singers, but she stood out. I don't know if you've had a chance to see this movie that was made about the opening of the Met, but a lot of it she speaks, and she was probably 90 at that point. And she talked about singing Antony and Cleopatra for the opening of the hall. And she said, she may have said I was so good. She certainly was very pleased with her performance. She said, I just wanted to kiss myself all over. But she said something else very important, which she said a few times. I was always very well prepared. And that's, of course, the best answer for all of us, to be that well prepared.
She would walk on stage with the most regal attitude of preparedness, steeped in your own confidence. And
Yes.
just that, I got that from her. Now, when I walk too fast on the stage because I'm excited, I have to think like Leontine Price, and I'm not kidding. That is the person I think of because her walk was so slow. And in her older years, she wore this big turban.
Turban, right? She wore the turbans.
You said you had a story about Tales of Hoffmann.
Oh, this is a wonderful story. It was the second night of the season, which meant it was opening night for Tales of Hoffmann because we would do different operas on different nights. And in the pit, I don't know if it's still there, but there was a telephone, an old-fashioned telephone on the bottom of the stairs that the conductor would go up and down on the concertmaster side. And if the stage director needed to get to the orchestra pit for some reason, needed to tell us something, there would be a light that would go on. The concertmaster would get up and speak on the phone to him and relay whatever. So we were supposed to start, I believe, at 7:30, and 7:30 came and went, and we see Ray Gnevik on the phone and ask him what's going on. They don't have a tenor. The tenor had called in sick, and the cover tenor had laryngitis. So they were trying to figure out what to do. Finally, I'm guessing it was about 10 after 8 when we were supposed to start at 7:30. He said they have a starter. And they got the poor man with laryngitis to go out on the stage and start. And about midway through the first act, I started to hear the tenor part sung from the pit to my right. And I look over, and there is the tenor, Kenneth Riegel, who actually did sing it with us maybe 2 years before, in street clothes, with a music stand and a score, singing the part. And from that moment on, the tenor on the stage began miming, because I guess it was too late to put him out there with no rehearsal or anything. And he was in the house, evidently, rehearsing something else. It was great. At intermission, the stage manager came out and announced to the audience what was going on. At the end, the two of them came out together and took a bow. It was so wonderful. It was really wonderful.
Speaking of challenges, talk about the challenges that you faced as a flutist in such a renowned ensemble.
Well, there were a lot of challenges. First of all, I began very young, and I began as a second flute. So that in itself was something. When I began, there were two flutists, two principal flutists the entire time I was there. When I began, one had unfortunately just been fired. Jimmy Politis began the season. Within the 3 weeks, he was in the hospital with inoperable cancer. So suddenly we had no one. John Wyan had been hired to play the season in place of the person who had been fired. And obviously someone had to take Jimmy Politis' place. So the first challenge was playing first flute when it wasn't my job. So I had a lot of experience before I came to the Met with walking in at the last minute in very high pressure, prestigious surroundings. I did this with the New York Philharmonic for the 2 years that I was the principal. Excuse me, first call, so I was the principal. So it didn't scare me as much as it might have. But people's perceptions, here's this young person. Now, they had seen me. I had been subbing with them before I won the second flute audition. I had gone on tour with them as the piccolo player before I began as second flute. But still, I played 2 shows on a Saturday. The first one was Il Trovatore, and the principal clarinet player, God bless him, kicked my chair every time I had to play, which was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So I always knew it was time. He wasn't there in the evening when I had to play Il Trittico. Now, I had been playing these operas, but not principal, obviously. So Al Genovese, wonderful oboe player, who left after my first year and went to play principal in Boston, came in and looked. He came in about 5 minutes before the show began, looked at me and said, "What's going on here?" That was not exactly confidence producing, but I did the best I could. Il Trittico is 3 short operas. By the third opera, I think he was convinced. And we were great friends from that moment on. He was very helpful to me from that moment on. There were very few women still in the orchestra. So, and I was the first one to play principal. I can't tell you many times I heard the phrase, "She wants to be a man." That didn't surprise me. I had heard it before. So, but I did hear it a lot. The other thing, though, was interesting was there was a lot of advice, which was wonderful and sometimes too much, but it was all meant very well. I think I won them over. I know that women had trouble winning auditions before me at the Met. And once they saw what I could do, they hired 2 more young females to play principal within the year. So that's a good sign. I like to think that I had some part in their being hired.
I have to say that I'm sure the transition then from leaving the Met to, and performing regularly, sometimes 2 operas a day, to teaching, it was a significant shift. So what inspired you to transition into teaching? Now, I would know the obvious decision was that you loved it, you were good at it, and you had a studio, but not a lot of people know that. And a lot of retiring orchestral musicians think that they can retire into teaching. And you and I both know that would be a shift that would be even more busy and more consuming because you're dealing with lives, mentorship, just advancing the careers of others. So I know that takes a lot more soul power than the orchestra. And I say that with love in my heart, having done both. So what inspired you then to transition to teaching at the Frost School of Music?
Okay, so for me, first of all, the Met job, which was wonderful, and I loved it. I loved playing at such a high level on a very regular basis, was very physical. And as one gets older, you feel it more and more and more. And after 30 years there, I was very seriously contemplating when I was going to retire. The job became open in Florida, and I thought, well, this would be nice. I did have a little of what you said, thinking that it would be a little easier. That was a big surprise, because you're absolutely right. It's probably even more difficult and more time consuming, more tiring than playing the opera, which was a surprise to me. But it was a wonderful one, because I loved my students. I loved helping them. I loved contributing to shaping their lives, to getting them on a track. It's been wonderful. So I have enjoyed it as much as playing in the opera. I'm so happy that I did it.
So how do you encourage these students to connect with, these emotional and artistic elements of music that opera offers? Because we go for the excerpts that are in the orchestra and not necessarily the opera excerpts. So how did you encourage them to connect that way?
I had an orchestral audition weekly class. Mostly it was the older students who took it, but we always did some opera excerpts. That was the first thing. But I decided after a few years that I really wanted to do more. And one summer I sat down and transcribed the second act of La Boheme for flute ensemble, which, by the way, will be heard by the tribute concert for my Lifetime Achievement Award at the National Flute Association. My students are going to come and play it, which is really wonderful. I did that to teach them how to play the opera. And there's no better teacher than Puccini. We spent a good part of the semester learning how to play in that style. And it was a big learning curve. But boy, did they do it great. And I think the opera offers so much in terms of learning how to phrase, how to shape a piece, how to shape a line. This was a wonderful experience for all of us. So I did a couple of other opera arrangements after that. It was a little less work teaching it to them because of the initial work. But I think that more than anything, that's how I taught it to them. And it was great to be able to teach it to all of them at the same time.
So let's talk about some of these Puccini arias. First, we have the one from Gieseking that is so famous.
Oh, what a beautiful aria that is. That one is so simple.
So in the book I have, it says, "Oh, my beloved father," but in Italian, it's not that.
Oh, Babino Caro. I'm sorry, I don't know what Babino means. And I always think it's Bambino, but it's not.
And then we have Nessun Dorma from Turandot by Puccini.
Right. Well, for that, you really need a tenor. Someone, because it's so heroic. It's so heroic. And, tenors, for them to sing so high as it is at the very end is just so extraordinarily inspiring. And that's something we really cannot replicate on the flute. And I used to think, when I come back in another life, I might like to be an operatic tenor, so I could do those things.
Yes, there's Puccini's Madame Butterfly. There's an aria from Madame Butterfly.
That was a famous aria that one would hear in competitions all the time. And, it's very interesting. One can just play these. As we began the conversation, you can just play the notes, or you can play individual phrases. But these are all about where are they going? They're going somewhere. Like Nessun Dorma. Well, in that case, the climax really is the top note. So it's all going to that, which is at the end. Very exciting.
So we're not necessarily talking about flute solos. We're talking now about arias that are famous that you should play and practice on the flute. So here's another one, Puccini's Tosca.
Tosca's an interesting character because she's very full of herself. But in the Vici d'Arte, she is faced with such an incredible choice of having to give of herself in a way that she would like not to have to do to save her lover. And she sings about, how could this happen? I've been a good person. I'm religious. I go to church. How did this happen? It's very, very heart-wrenching. So, I did a recital once in which I I played something I always thought I would love to be able to do. And of course, it's not the same on the flute, but I did from Eugene Onegin, the letter scene. The story is Tatiana, who's a teenager, falls in love with Onegin, who's kind of a cad, or at least she thinks she does. She's a young person, and she writes this incredible letter at night to him to profess her love. And there's this great scene as she's writing the letter. And it's just so incredibly heart-wrenching that it's just wonderful. And I did play it on the flute for a recital that was actually to come right after an opera performance at the school, which is why I did it. And it was great fun to do it. But truly, you have to sing that. So
another one worth singing, but playing on the flute also is from La Boheme, when her hand is frozen and, he's clutching her hand.
Okay, Jelly da Manina. This is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
The thing about operatic arias, which actually could be a very good learning tool, is there's a lot of repetition of the same note, like in Che Gelli da Manina. And so it's a wonderful thing to learn how to play repeated notes. That's another thing that a lot of young people do not do well.
So Moyes tone development through interpretation, you can take these arias and turn them into completely different stories in another key. I'm always urging my podcast listeners to play Mozart G major, the first few bars in G sharp major, in F major, just to get a new concept. So I love that Moyes wrote this basic Bible of opera arias, right? To get us to transpose. How interesting is that? He could have taken anything, but he took opera arias to do it.
Well, and what could be better, right?
So, could you name the top 5 opera arias called for in an audition for Principal Flute?
Well, they're Rose and Cavalier. Very difficult solo in the opening act. Very, very difficult. And there's someone standing on the stage impersonating a flutist who gets all the attention while you're working very, very hard. There are 2 solos in the first act, and definitely those. Carmen is always there.
Is Salome there like it is in orchestral repertoire?
It's often there, yes, and it should be there. It should be there. And that is one, boy, you can do so much with the color. And I'm going to say something that people probably are going to be annoyed with me, but I think women play that solo much better than men do. And maybe it's because we can understand what a 16-year-old young woman might be going through. But it's so important to to feel all that yearning and where is it going? And it's very exciting. Carmen, of course.
Lucia de Lammermoor.
One conductor actually had me stand on the podium. He was so sweet. He had me stand in the front of the pit for the scene, and then for the actual cadenza, he put my music on top of his score every time, got off the podium, and I went on there and played. You know the feeling, have you ridden in a helicopter? And when you're in a helicopter and it goes up, all of a sudden the world expands in front of you. When I stood up on the podium, it was the same thing. All of a sudden I was looking at this huge expanse, which I was not used to seeing because it's behind me. So that was in itself a challenge, but I always took my focus was the singer. And I loved that. I got a lot of compliments on being able to stay with the singer. I will tell you that my first instrument was the piano, and I started accompanying almost immediately. So when you accompany young children who can do anything with the music, I think if you can follow them, you can do anything. So I had that experience. But Lucia is one that's full of G's that repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat.
If we were to think like a second flutist to audition for an opera job, what would we be practicing?
Well, there's from the second act of Carmen, that would be there. There's a passage from Butterfly that would be there. What we often asked, because sometimes the operas only call for two people and flute would play piccolo, was a number from Magic Flute on the piccolo, which the second flutist would play.
And piccolo, what's your favorite piccolo opera excerpt?
Probably the one that I'd want to hear the most would be from the Trittico, from Suor Angelica. It's a beautiful aria, beautiful and long solo. I played it at the Met. I actually came in and sight read one night and played it before I was a regular, and then moved over to play first. And I played it on tour when I went on tour as the piccolo player. It's written to be played off stage, and most of the time I was at the Met, it was indeed played off stage. That particular year it was in the pit, and it is marked softly, primarily because it just seemed far away. But it goes all the way up to high Fs and sustained high Fs, and calls for a lot. So that one would definitely be asked. There's a solo from Ravel, L'Enfant de la Sortilège. That's another very, very difficult one. So those two would be very good. And of course, the Mozart that I mentioned. Those are the first ones that come off the top of my head. And this will be on all three parts from Aida. And by the way, the solo from Aida from the Nile scene would be in the first flute audition. But the Triumphal March, the triplet section, all three parts would be on auditions.
This has been so informative. I am so proud to say that an alum from my studio, Dr. Seth Morris, is now in one of the seats at the Met. And I was so excited to see him come onto the stage to play with the singer.
I was excited too, and I thought, what if I had been asked to do that? I don't know if I'd have the nerve to get up and walk onto the stage. So good for Seth. He looked as natural as could be. It was wonderful. And he sounded wonderful, of course. He always did.
I love to tell the story of how he came in his second year of his degree, kind of plopped down on the sofa, wasn't sure of what his lecture recital would be. But in being a teacher and a mentor, you just listen. And so I listened as he kind of rambled about this class he was taking in opera and the history of opera. And he wondered out loud if maybe he could talk about the history of the flute. and how it grew in opera. And I said, well, that sounds like fun. Let's learn about that. It starts with Gluck. And so he started with Gluck and started writing this lecture. Now, Trudy Kane, let me ask you, how much do you think that class and that dissertation lecture recital informed his Metropolitan Opera audition? Probably
I
a
don't
lot.
Of course. Absolutely. There's no question. So let's go back to perhaps the Houston audition. But he was such a beautiful player at that point. I don't think there's a question. So, but clearly he had a passion for the opera, and clearly he had listened and learned the styles, which are different. Playing the opera is different. It's so much more natural. One of the things you had written to ask me about was, how is the opera different? And it is. You learn to play as we speak in a way that we don't always learn in more classical music, which tends to be straightforward. Sometimes we would share conductors, the Met and the New York Philharmonic, and sometimes the ones that we loved were not so beloved at the New York Philharmonic, and the reason was because they would do things differently every night, right? And they didn't do it, so straightforward. They would let the music breathe, and the phrasing was, I thought, more interesting. But it's all in what you're used to, I guess. But in any case, I'm sure that Seth was already fascinated by this, and then he had wonderful experience, and I'm so happy to see him in that position. I heard Seth. He came to play for me with other flutists from the New World Symphony, I think to prepare for an opera audition. And the last class that I gave them was a mock audition. I did not see who was playing, but I spoke to each person after they played. And you'll like this. When he came in to get my notes, I said, Seth, when you play, I hear magic.
Yes.
And I still hear that. And it's wonderful. I'm very happy he's there.
Do you miss teaching? How are you doing in retirement? Because, you never seem to retire in my head.
Well, I'm enjoying having time. And, the beginning of my retirement, my first year was the year that COVID began.
Oh.
So we all kind of changed at that point. I have always been fascinated by cooking. I know you like to do that too. Yeah. And I had suddenly all this time, even more so because of COVID. So I'm enjoying that a great deal. I will give Zoom lessons. I'm still doing master classes. I'm doing a class in a couple of days at the Boston Flute Academy. And I do the occasional flute day. I was so happy to go to our mutual student, Daniel Velasco, last year and do his flute day. We both love Daniel. So that was lovely. And to see my grand students, that was also lovely. And I still will teach the occasional lesson and the master class, but I'm also, you reach a point where you are indeed tired. I hope that you never get there, but physically it does happen. And I'm not sorry. And I'm enjoying my life now as much as I enjoyed before. So.
Well, congratulations on the National Flute Association Lifetime Achievement Award in 2024. So we're going to celebrate you. I'm sorry I can't be there with you, but you've got a lot of great students coming to love all over you, and justly so. Are you looking forward to that?
I'm so excited. I'm disappointed that you won't be able to join us, but I am very excited. And I wrote to all my Frost students and said, I want to do this concert. I want you to play. I want to do the arrangements that I had written for them. And they are so excited. It's just wonderful. So we're going to have lots of party. That it'll be great.
That's great. Well, it has been just such a treasure to talk to you today. We didn't get to do it for quite some time. And I just feel like we didn't miss a beat with each other. You're still someone that I look up to for answers. So I think if I have questions, I'm going to call you. So
thank you.
Thank you for being my guest today.
It was lovely. Thank you for having me.
What a delight to spend time with my mentor and teacher for 2 years while I was a freelancer in New York City after my master's degree. Trudy Kane, thank you for being my guest. On this audio track, you're listening to my performance of the Carmen Fantasy by Bourne, Christopher Harding on the piano. If you've enjoyed Porter Flute Pod, visit us at our website, porterflute.com. You'll find transcriptions of our current episodes as well as links to our past episodes. On YouTube and Instagram, I'm Porter Flute. You can also find me at amyporter.com and find out what's new at amyporterproductions.com. Thanks for being in Porter Flute Pod. I'm so grateful for you.